The kettle had just started to whistle when he said it. "Ma, you can't keep buying this junk." His voice was flat, but the words landed like gravel in warm tea. I stood there holding the scratch-off ticket with my old fingers' edges still curled from my coat pocket. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and lemon soap. I had just poured myself a cup when Caleb walked in, arms folded like a warden. And Jenna, she did not even pretend to smile. "You don't have income, Mom. That's our grocery money." Her words were dipped in fake kindness. "You live here rent-free. At least don't waste. Rent-free." A phrase I would hear again that morning. They had forgotten, or maybe they had chosen to, that I once worked 3 night shifts in a diner while Caleb slept in the booth corner with crayons. That I had paid the down payment on this very house when Jenna's credit had failed. That I raised their daughter Lily every summer when they were too overwhelmed. But now I was the woman who bought trash. A $5 scratcher from the corner gas station. The same kind I had bought every Tuesday for years. They didn't ask if I'd signed the back. They didn't even look at it. I stared down at the numbers unscratched. Tiny silver squares, like doors unopened. Still quiet. Still full of maybe. I said nothing. Just tucked the ticket back into my pocket and folded my cardigan over it like a secret. The clock ticked behind me. My coffee cooled untouched. "You're not a child anymore, Mom," Caleb muttered, as if I had asked to be cared for. As if I hadn't given him everything I had and then some. The kettle kept whistling. Nobody turned it off. In that moment, with steam rising, and my name unsaid, I realized something. They did not see me anymore. Not as a mother. Not as a person. Not even as a name on a piece of paper. But I had signed it. With my full name. Like I always did. And that morning the ticket said, the prize said $12,600,000. I didn't scratch it yet. I just stood there, fingers resting over my name while the world around me forgot it existed. Do you know what it feels like? To be erased with your eyes still open. I used to believe Tuesday mornings were lucky. It was the only day Caleb left for work early and the house stayed quiet until noon. I would lace my old sneakers, pull on my gray coat, and walk the 6 blocks to the gas station. Always the same one. Always the same woman behind the counter. Her name was Tasha. She never asked much. Just smiled, handed me a wild clover ticket and said, "You want the usual, Miss Evelyn." That miss mattered. It reminded me someone still saw me as mine before I became someone's mother, someone's burden. I liked the sound of the coin scratching silver. It felt like choosing something in a life where most choices were already made by others. Some knit. Some garden. I scratched tiny doors of possibility. And I always signed the back. Right there in the shop with a shaky blue pen I kept in my coat. Just in case. Back home I would tuck the ticket into my old wallet. The leather had worn thin at the corners, but it still closed with a soft click, like a secret being kept. Sometimes I won $5. Once I won 20. I never told anyone. It was not about money. It was about being part of something uncertain. Something still mine. That morning, after Caleb's words and Jenna's stare, I walked to the gas station again. The air was dry and sharp. The sun felt far away. Tasha saw my face and didn't ask questions. She just handed me the ticket already printed. Already waiting. I signed it again. Full name. Date. Initials. As if my signature was a kind of prayer. On the way back, I stopped outside the bakery window. A little girl pressed her hand to the glass, pointing at the cupcakes. Her mother leaned down and kissed her forehead. I used to do that with Caleb. I stood there longer than I meant to. And in my pocket the ticket sat quiet, waiting to be seen. Not by the world. Just by one person who remembered what my name meant. That person was no longer in that house. So I walked home slowly, wondering what I had built and what was already gone. The front door creaked like it did every fall. No one oiled the hinges anymore. Inside the house smelled like candles Jenna liked to buy in bulk. Vanilla, and something sharp beneath it like bleach. I took off my coat, folded it slowly, and placed it on the arm of the couch. The ticket stayed in the pocket. I did not take it out. In the kitchen, dishes from last night were still in the sink. I reached for the sponge, but Jenna walked in behind me. "No need, I got it," she said, without looking at me. She always said it like that. Like a reminder. Like a warning. So I stepped back, hands damp, and walked into the small den. That used to be my space. Where I read or embroidered names on old pillowcases. But now the baby toys were gone. The bookshelves were gone. Only a television and a fold-out couch remained. They called it the guest area. I had lived in that house for 11 years. Jenna called from the hallway. "We'll be out late tonight. Caleb's promotion dinner." I had forgotten. Or maybe they never told me. "That's nice," I said, though no one answered. I made myself tea. From the old tin I kept at the back of the cabinet. Bags of mint and chamomile folded in wax paper. I sipped it slowly, standing by the window, where the basil plant I had raised was starting to wilt. It used to be Lily's favorite smell. She would rub the leaves and press them to her nose. She used to ask if plants could cry when you stopped talking to them. I never knew what to say. Now the plant sat dry, leaning toward the light as if searching for a softer voice. The house was quiet. Not peaceful. Just hollow. I walked back to my little room and sat on the edge of the bed. From the drawer I pulled out a photo. Caleb, age 5, his cheeks round, a gap between his teeth. He was holding a plastic shovel, digging in the yard we could barely afford. His father had taken the picture. Back when we still laughed about pennies found on sidewalks and lucky numbers. I held the photo and closed my eyes. Back then, we didn't have much. But we never forgot each other's names. Now I wasn't sure if mine still meant anything at all. That night I ate dinner alone in the kitchen. Leftover rice, a slice of cold chicken. No one asked if I was hungry. They came home laughing. Shoes clacked against the tile. Jenna's voice floated down the hall, bright and sharp like glass in sunlight. I stayed quiet. Folded my napkin 3 times. Washed my plate. Dried it slowly. Put it back in the wrong cabinet on purpose. Just to remember that I still had hands. Later, I sat by the front window. The living room lights were off. Only the glow of the street lamp touched the carpet. I held the ticket in my hand. Still unscratched. Still full of maybe. The coin I always used was tucked inside my wallet. A 1,974 nickel, faded. Bent slightly at the edge. It had belonged to my husband. He used to keep it in his coat pocket for luck, he said. He never won anything. But he liked the idea of trying. We were married 17 years. He died on a Tuesday. Just after Lily was born. After that I stopped believing in signs. But I kept the nickel. And the habit. At 10:17 in the evening, I finally scratched the first line. Just one. A number. 7. I stopped. Put the coin down. Folded the ticket back in half. Slid it into the envelope I had taken from the drawer with the old tax returns. "Not yet," I whispered. "Not tonight." I placed it under the worn placemat on the side table beside my bed. A quiet place. Between the Bible I no longer read and the lavender sachet Lily once made me in school. Outside I heard Caleb laugh. Then the sound of a cork popping. Then music. Some old rock band he used to love when he was 16. The same song he played at his graduation party. The one I paid for by skipping rent that spring. I listened. Not to the words. Just to the tone. And I realized he had not changed. Not really. Only his memory of me had. And maybe that was the cruelest thing of all. The next morning I woke before anyone else. The air in the room felt thin, like it had not been touched all night. I moved slowly, joints stiff, eyes heavy. From the side table I pulled out the envelope. My name was written on the front. Shaky, cursive. Blue ink. Still mine. The house was quiet. Only the soft hum of the fridge and the tick of the hallway clock. I sat down at the kitchen table, unfolded the ticket, and began to scratch. One line. Then two. Then all of them. The numbers matched. One by one. The prize box showed the words first. Then the number. $12,600,000. I read it once. Then again. Then again, slower. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs. I did not scream. I did not smile. I just stared. Not at the money. At the space around it. At the lines that said winner. Jackpot. Sign upon purchase. And I had. I always had. I folded the ticket again. Slipped it back inside the envelope. Then placed it deep into the zipper pouch of my old purse. No one else was awake. So I made tea. Boiled water. Mint leaves from the last harvest dried by the window. The smell reminded me of Lily in her pajamas asking for Grandma's garden tea. That morning no one came to the kitchen. No one asked about breakfast. By 10 o'clock I had swept the floors, watered the plant, and folded towels left in the dryer. Still, I said nothing. At noon, Caleb rushed in, phone to his ear. He barely nodded. Then disappeared upstairs. Jenna followed soon after, holding a stack of shopping bags. She smiled to herself like she had just remembered something worth keeping. Neither looked at me. And I, with a $12 million truth tucked against my hips, stood in the same kitchen they once called mine. But I no longer belonged. And they no longer knew what I was holding. That afternoon I went to fold laundry in the back room. Sunlight streamed through the window, warming the tile under my feet. I liked that time of day. The quiet folding. The simple rhythm. The basket sat where I always left it, by the pantry door. Wicker. Faded. Lined with an old pillowcase I had sewn years ago. I reached in, expecting socks. Towels. Maybe the old lottery ticket I had scratched last week. I always kept the losing ones. Not for any real reason. Just habit. But the basket felt light. I dug deeper. Lifted the towels. Checked under the liner. Empty. I paused. Then checked again. The little pile of losing tickets I usually kept at the bottom was gone. At first I told myself I had tossed them. Or maybe Lily had used them for drawing. But she had not visited in weeks. And I never threw them away without tearing them in half first. I opened the trash can. Nothing but eggshells and paper towels. The pantry shelf. Clear. My stomach turned, not sharply, but like the first ripple before a storm. Something had been taken. Not just any ticket. But the one I signed. The one I scratched alone in my room 2 days ago. I sat down slowly. Hands on my lap. Breath short. Outside, I heard the sound of tires on gravel. A delivery truck. Then the doorbell. Then laughter. I stood up, walked to the front window, and looked out. A man in a blue uniform wheeled a large box onto the porch. Flat-screen television. Still wrapped in plastic. Jenna came out wearing silk pajamas, hair still pinned. She signed the form with a flourish. Then waved the man off like she had done it 100 times. By the time I turned back, the envelope in my purse felt heavier. And the silence in the house felt too careful. I went back to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of tea, and sat in the corner where no one looked. From there, I watched them toast something I had not been invited to. That night, they danced. I heard the music through the walls. Old pop songs. Laughing. The clink of glass. I stayed in my room unfolding and refolding the same hand towel over and over. They never said a word about a win. Not out loud. But I saw the signs. New shoes by the door. Packages arriving. A handbag Jenna once called too expensive to dream about. Now hanging on the kitchen chair. Still, I said nothing. The next morning, I went to check the mail. A short walk. Familiar gravel path. I always carried my key. Same brass one I had used since we moved in. But when I returned it no longer fit. I turned it once. Twice. Tried again slower this time. Nothing. The lock had been changed. I knocked. Soft at first. Then again louder. The door opened halfway. Caleb stood there, eyes avoiding mine. Voice low. Mom, we just need space right now. He blinked. My things are inside. He shifted. We packed them for you. They're on the porch. Behind him Jenna's voice rang out light and sweet. She'll be fine, Caleb. She's independent. She's strong. I looked past him. 2 suitcases. My coat. A plastic bag half torn with my shoes inside. No chair. No ride offered. No apology. Just a door slowly closing. And me outside again. I picked up the bags, one at a time. Each one felt heavier than it looked. I walked to the curb, set them down, and sat beside them. The sun was already high. Too warm for a coat. Too cold without it. Behind me music played again. They were celebrating. They had found something they believed was theirs. But they had not looked at the back of the ticket. And they had not looked at me. Not really. Not the mother who tucked them in with tired hands. Not the woman who still remembered every birthday without reminders. They toasted their luck, but I carried the truth. And I knew exactly what to do with it. The library smelled like dust and old glue. But it was warm. And quiet. I had nowhere else to go. Angela, the head librarian, recognized me. She nodded gently, then went back to stamping returns. No questions. No surprise. I found a seat by the window. Plugged my phone into the outlet. Wrapped my coat tighter around my knees. The cold in my bones had nothing to do with weather. I opened my purse. The envelope was still there. Pressed flat. Uncreased. I placed it on the table like something sacred. Then I pulled out my phone. Old flip model. Chipped edges. Tired buttons. Ryan used to mock it. You still using that dinosaur? He would laugh like he had built something. But it still worked. And it remembered what I asked it to. I opened the photo gallery. Scrolled slowly. There it was. A picture taken 3 days earlier. The ticket flat on the gas station counter. My name written clearly on the back. I always took a picture. Just in case. I zoomed in. The store address. The time. The scratch-off numbers still covered. Everything matched. The ache behind my eyes tightened. They had taken the ticket. Claimed it as theirs. And never even bothered to check the name. They were celebrating off something I had signed. I placed the phone face down. Closed my eyes. This was not anger. Not yet. It was something deeper. A kind of betrayal that does not shout. Just settles low and cold in the chest. I stayed there for a long time. Listening to the soft tap of keyboard keys. The occasional hum of the vending machine. Then I opened the browser. Typed slowly. Nevada State Lottery. Lost ticket. Disputed claim. The page loaded. Hotline. Email. Instructions. I read each word twice. Then dialed the number. A woman answered. Her voice calm. Professional. She asked my name, the game, date and location of purchase. I gave her everything. Then I offered to send the photo. She paused. If your name is on the ticket, she said, and you are the purchaser, it is yours. I held the phone tighter. My fingers trembled. She gave me a case number. Do not discard anything, she said. Keep the ticket. Keep the photo. I thanked her. Then I sat back, hand on my chest, feeling something I had not felt in a long time. A beginning. That afternoon I walked back to the gas station. 6 blocks. Familiar sidewalk cracks. Same elm tree with the crooked trunk. Inside the lights buzzed faintly. The young man behind the counter had messy hair and a tattoo of a sparrow on his arm. His name tag read Danny. He looked up, paused, then smiled. You're the wild clover lady. I nodded. I need help, I said. My name is Evelyn. I bought a ticket here 3 days ago. Tuesday morning. Around 10:30. He tilted his head. You okay? Not really, I said. But I'm working on it. He nodded. Picked up the phone. Called his manager. Then printed a still image from the security camera. It showed me at the counter, handing over a $5 bill. Ticket in my left hand. Wallet in my right. He slid the printout across the counter. I stared at it for a long time. My shoulders were slumped. Hair pinned back. Tired. But present. Real. Thank you, I whispered. He smiled again, this time softer. Good luck, ma'am. I folded the image, tucked it into the envelope with the ticket and the phone photo. Then I walked back to the library. Angela brought me tea in a paper cup. No questions. No pity. Just warm. That evening I emailed everything to the lottery office. Ticket. Photo. ID. Security still. An hour later, the reply came. Your claim has been logged. Based on preliminary information, the ticket is valid and legally yours. Please await formal review. I stared at those words. Legally yours. 3 syllables that felt like a roof settling back over my head. I did not cry. I did not cheer. I just closed the email, placed my hands in my lap, and sat very still. Outside cars passed with their lights on. Inside, my name had finally been seen. 2 days later, another email arrived. Subject line claim approved. I opened it slowly. Heart quiet. Hands steady. Your identity has been verified. The ticket is officially registered under your name. You are eligible to claim the full prize amount. Anonymity options are available. I read it 3 times. Then again. Rightful winner. Not mistaken. Not shared. Just mine. I chose the senior privacy clause. A quiet path. No cameras. No press. I did not want applause. I wanted breath. I closed the laptop. Pressed my palm flat against the envelope. The ticket still inside. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. 4 missed calls from Caleb. 2 messages from Jenna. I didn't open them. But I saw the preview. Mom, did you find the ticket? We think it might have been yours. No big deal. Let's talk. No big deal. That phrase settled in my chest like a stone. They knew. They had tried to claim it. And now the state had told them the truth. The name didn't match. And they were left with nothing but noise. The next day, Jenna posted on social media. Angela called me to the desk. Is this about you? She asked. On the screen, a photo of Jenna standing on their porch, hand on Lily's shoulder. Eyes, sad. Perfect lighting. The caption read, We are heartbroken. My husband's elderly mother stole our lottery ticket. She's confused. This was meant for our daughter's future. He ended the post with bitter claims: elder abuse, lottery theft. Pray for us. I stared at the photo. The calm tea in my hand suddenly felt cold. So that was their plan. If they couldn't take the money, they'd take my name. They expected silence, shame, but they had forgotten one thing. I kept everything. The photo, the footage, the receipt, the letter from the state. And I was not afraid to let the truth speak. I walked to the front desk, borrowed the library computer, and opened a blank document. To whom it may concern, I typed, "Here is the truth." I read the post twice. Jenna's face perfectly lit. Her hand placed gently on Lily's shoulder. The caption beneath it cut sharp. She took it from us. She lied. This was for our daughter's future. Then came the words that dug deepest. She's confused. She's old. She doesn't know what she's doing. I looked at the screen. But what I felt was something colder than shame. I had been many things in my life. Tired, quiet, lonely. But never a liar. And never confused about who I was. I sipped my tea. Lukewarm now. Then set it down. Angela the librarian stood nearby. She didn't say anything. She just reached out and touched my arm. Soft. Grounding. They don't know who they're dealing with, she said gently. I smiled. But it didn't reach my eyes. I walked back to the corner table. Opened the old folder I had started keeping in my purse. Inside the signed ticket. My ID. The photo at the gas station. The security still. The email from the state. I added one more thing: a printout of Jenna's post. Then I opened a blank document. Titled it, Statement of Truth. I wrote slowly. Each word felt heavier than the last. I did not steal anything. I purchased the ticket on Tuesday morning using my own money. I signed the back. I photographed it. I have the original. Underneath I listed each item. Attached each image. Labeled everything by date and time. No emotion. Just clarity. I saved it all as one file. Named it EJW, Lottery, Truth, PDF. I emailed it to a small local paper. The same one that once printed Caleb's graduation photo with the caption, "Future Leader of Tomorrow." I didn't know if they'd read it. But I needed it somewhere outside my purse. That evening, the first call came. Blocked number. I didn't answer. Then another. Then 3 messages. Caleb. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. Mom. We didn't mean to upset you. It just got out of hand. Then Jenna, too sweet. Too late. If we could just talk. Maybe we could work something out. She ended with think of Lily. I did. Every day. I remembered the way she curled up in my lap when she had the flu. The way she used to slip drawings under my door. But none of that justified the lie. Not this time. I turned off the phone. Closed the folder. And for the first time since the door had shut on me, I felt taller sitting down. Because the only thing stronger than a voice is a documented truth. The article went live the next morning. A friend of Angela's had forwarded it to her. She printed it out and slid it across the table. I unfolded the paper with slow fingers. There I was. A grainy photo from the gas station. My name printed clearly on the ticket. Date, time, store receipt. The headline was quiet. She was called a thief. But the records say otherwise. I read it in full. Each paragraph felt like a stone lifted from my chest. The story told everything. The signed back. The photo evidence. The verification from the lottery office. And then at the end a single sentence. She never spoke until the truth was spoken over her. I set the paper down. Hands steady. Spine straight. That afternoon comments started to appear beneath Jenna's post. Not sympathy. Not support. But question. Where is the proof it was yours? Why didn't you check the name? She bought it. You spent it. The shift was slow, then sudden. By evening, the post was gone. Removed without a word. But I had already printed a copy. Tucked safe in the folder with the rest. The next morning, Caleb called again. I let it ring. Then he tried texting. You win, Mom. Can we talk? I stared at the screen. Then turned it face down. Outside birds moved through the yard of the small studio I now rented. The air smelled like rain on dry leaves. I stepped outside with my tea. It tasted stronger today. Back inside, I sat at the desk and opened the final email from the Lottery Commission. Your payment is being processed. The funds will be transferred within 5 business days. No signature. Just a case number. I closed the laptop, folded the document, slipped it into the envelope with my name on it. I did not feel rich. I felt real. A week later, a note arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Just a single sentence. You win. We are leaving town. I held it without reaction, then placed it next to the photo of me at the counter. Not out of revenge. Just as proof that the truth, when protected, can outlive any lie. Not long after the house went up for sale. Then the profiles disappeared. Then the phone numbers changed. They erased themselves quietly, and the woman they called confused was finally undeniable. I did not reply. I did not explain, because at last the law had said it for me. I moved in on a Tuesday morning. The key turned with a soft click. No one watching. No one waiting. Just me. The house was small. White siding. Red mailbox. 2 front steps that creaked when it rained. It was enough. Inside, the air smelled like pine and quiet. I set down my suitcase. 1 bag. 1 folder. 1 envelope. No clutter. No voices behind doors. No footsteps rushing past me. The silence felt like sunlight. I made tea. Unpacked the old kettle they once called cheap. Set it on the stove. Waited for the whistle. The sound was gentle. Not sharp like before. It reminded me of mornings long before all this. Before the lies. Before the name calling. Before the silence turned into exile. I poured the water over a mint leaf from my pocket garden. The scent rose quickly. Clean. Sharp, alive. I stood at the window as it brewed. Watched a squirrel cross the fence. Listened to wind touch the shutters. The house had no internet yet. No cable. No furniture beyond what I brought. But it had space. It had stillness. And I was not a guest here. I drank slowly. Then reached for the envelope. Unsealed it. Pulled out the photograph. Me. Standing at the gas station counter. Holding the ticket. Looking tired but upright. I framed it with a small wooden border from the thrift store. Then placed it on the mantel. Just above the fireplace that had not been lit in years. Next to it I set a pine plaque. I had burned the words into it myself with a cheap tool and a steady hand. They toasted their luck. I held the truth. I stepped back to look at it. The photo. The plaque. The quiet room. And I smiled. Not big. Not proud. Just whole. It had taken 74 years for a room to feel like mine. But it did. And I was ready to begin again. I spent the first week doing small things. Little routines that asked nothing but presence. Each morning, I opened the front window just a crack. Let the air in. Let the birds speak first. I swept the porch, though no one walked on it. Wiped the kitchen table even when it was already clean. There was comfort in the rhythm. On Thursday, I planted rosemary by the windowsill. Not for cooking, just for scent. The old kettle sat quietly beside the stove. I polished it until it shone again. Then I found the quilt. The one I had started years ago. Abandoned in a closet after they said it looked outdated. I unfolded it on the sunroom chair. Threadbare at the corners. But it remembered me. In the afternoons I walked to the library. Not the big one in the city. A smaller branch. Quiet. Less polished. Angela had written ahead. The staff knew my name. They let me sit by the window without asking questions. There, I began to write letters I never meant to send. To myself. To my husband. To Lily. I told them how the mint leaves smelled in warm water. How the house held silence like a friend. I wrote down recipes from memory. The ones no one wanted but I couldn't forget. One day, a woman sat next to me. She wore a lavender coat. Held a knitting bag with yellow yarn. She smiled not too wide. The kind of smile that asked nothing and gave enough. You knew around here, she asked. I nodded. I'm Ruth, she said. People mostly leave each other alone here. But the bakery down the street does 2-for-1 scones on Fridays. We sat there for a while. No pressure. No past. Just two women sharing quiet. When I left, she handed me a folded flyer. Community garden. Spring sign-ups open. I tucked it into my coat pocket. Felt the paper against my ribs as I walked home. That night I placed the flyer on the fridge. Pinned it with a small magnet shaped like a pear. It held still. Like me, the house was still mostly empty. But it was filling with something new. Not things. Time. Room. Breath. And I was learning how to keep it. The next morning I went to the garden lot. Just to look. It sat behind the church lined with wooden squares and faded markers. Some empty. Some full of color. A little boy watered marigolds with a plastic cup. His grandmother stood beside him, hands in her apron pockets. I stood at the gate longer than I meant to. Then Ruth appeared. You thinking of joining? She asked, tilting her head. Maybe, I said. My hands missed the dirt. She nodded. There's a plot near the fence. It gets morning sun. She didn't push. Just waited. That evening, I filled out the form. Printed my name slowly. Evelyn J. Warren. I paid in cash. $15 for the season. The next day, I stood in front of my little patch. The soil was dry. But not hard. Just untouched. I knelt down and pressed my palm against the earth. It felt warm. Like it remembered things. I started small. 1 row of basil. Then chives. Then snap peas because Lily used to steal them straight from the stem. I didn't plant roses. Not yet. Each morning I carried my watering can down the sidewalk. Neighbors began to nod. Then wave. No one asked why I had moved. No one whispered about the money. They just let me be. Some days I sat on the garden bench after watering. I brought a sandwich. A book. Sometimes nothing. The sun felt different when it hit your skin without debt behind it. I brought home the first basil sprigs in a damp napkin. Laid them on the kitchen counter. Watched them dry in a shallow dish. That night I made soup. Simple. Carrot and lentil. Basil folded in at the very end. It tasted clean. Like something I grew myself. Because I had. Later, I opened a fresh card. Blank front. No lines. And I wrote one sentence with a black pen. I am not angry. I folded the card. Tucked it into the drawer. I did not plan to send it. It was enough to write it. To say it once in ink. Because healing is not always loud. Sometimes it is a seed planted without an audience. And I was beginning to grow again. If you've ever had to rebuild quietly, you're not alone. We invite you to share your story in the comments below. It started with a thank you note. Folded in half. Written in blue ink. No return address. Dear Evelyn, thank you for what you sent. The heater works now. We're keeping the library warm because of you. It was signed, Angela. And 10 other names I did not know. Each one in different handwriting. Some careful. Some barely legible. All real. I sat at the table and read it 3 times. Once with my eyes, twice with my breath. Then I placed it beside my folder. The same folder that once held my proof. Now it held something quieter. Gentler. Gratitude. I looked out the window. The light caught the old curtain casting soft lines across the table. A breeze slipped through the cracked window. It smelled like cold wood and rosemary from the sill. I closed my eyes and listened to nothing. Not absence. Not silence. Just stillness. The next day I baked 2 loaves of bread. Banana walnut. My old recipe written in the faded notebook I had nearly thrown away. 1 loaf to keep. 1 to give. The dough felt familiar under my palms. Warm. Patient. As it rose, I sat with my tea watching the steam dance in the kitchen air. Then I walked to the library. Still early. Mist on the grass. My shoes damp, but I did not mind. Angela was shelving books when I arrived. I handed her the bread wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. She smiled, tilted her head. You're settling in, she said softly. I nodded. I think I am. She pointed to the side room. Senior group meets Friday mornings. Sometimes we just knit and drink tea. You'd fit in. I didn't answer right away. Her words hung there like the scent of cinnamon in the air. Then I said I'd like that. That evening, I pulled out the knitting basket. The same one Jenna once mocked as outdated. I sorted the yarn. Folded the corners of the quilt again. It felt good to hold things that didn't argue back. That just waited to be made whole. Later I found an old journal at the bottom of the drawer. Blank pages. Soft cover. I wrote a list. Things I know now. 1. Truth waits but it does not vanish. 2. Money reveals but does not define. 3. Kindness returns even when you stop expecting it. 4. I am still here. I closed the journal. Tied it shut with a piece of green yarn. Then I lit a candle. Let it burn as the tea cooled. The light flickered against the photo on the mantel. And I knew. It was time to speak back. Not with noise. Not with anger. But with something that would outlive both. A plan was forming. Slow, simple, but mine. I called the town clerk's office the next morning. Asked if the community center still ran winter coat drives. The woman on the line sounded surprised. Then grateful. Yes, she said. But we're short this year. Donations are low. Cold came early. I asked what they needed most. She paused. Then said children's sizes. And gloves. Lots of gloves. I thanked her and wrote everything down in the margin of my grocery list. Then I walked to the kitchen. Poured tea. Watched the steam curl toward the ceiling. The light outside was the soft gray of late November. I sat at the table and opened my folder again. Inside was the deposit slip from the lottery office. The one I never looked at too long. It was not the number that stayed with me. It was the silence that came after it. I pulled out my checkbook. Wrote slowly. $3,000 to the Coat Drive. Sent directly from my name with no return address. I sealed the envelope. Pressed the flap down with the back of a spoon. A habit from long ago. Then I walked to the mailbox. The flag went up with a small wooden sound. And for the first time in weeks, I did not flinch when the wind touched my face. That evening, I made soup again. This time with barley and sweet potato. Enough for two. I brought the second jar to Ruth's door. She opened it slowly. No surprise in her eyes. Just welcome. We ate quietly on her porch. Wrapped in blankets. Sharing warmth without words. I read that article, she said, finally. The one about the ticket. I didn't answer. You don't owe me anything. But I want you to know what you did took more than luck. It took memory. I looked at her. Her hands wrapped around the chipped mug. And I felt it again. That ache. But not the sharp kind. The tender kind. Like something had just begun to heal. Before I left, she handed me a seed packet. White tulips, she said. They bloom slow, but when they do, you'll know. I placed it on my windowsill beside the basil. And I knew where they'd go. Right along the fence of my new garden bed. Not for beauty. Not for show. Just to say I was here. And I had chosen to stay. The next day I returned to the garden. The air was cool. Still. Smelled faintly of earth and old pine. My plot waited exactly as I left it. Tidy. Silent. I brought a small shovel, a cushion for my knees, and the packet of tulip seeds Ruth had given me. They rattled when I shook them gently. Like bones or bells, or truth waiting to be buried right. I read the instructions twice, though I already knew. 6 inches deep. 4 apart. Face the sun even if it hides. I dug slowly. Each scoop of soil felt deliberate. Sacred. I placed the bulbs one by one, not just in rows. In intention. Then covered them with care. Pressed the surface flat, with the flat of my hand. When I stood, my knees ached. But I smiled anyway. A woman from 2 plots over offered a wave. I nodded back. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. Not for revenge. Not for court. For clarity. His name was Mr. Lyons. Soft voice. Firm words. I told him I wanted to set up a quiet fund. Nothing big. Just enough. For the library. The garden. And girls like Lily, who might one day need to remember someone stood for them. He asked me what I wanted to name it. I paused. Then said the White Tulip Fund. He nodded as if he understood more than he asked. It would take time to file the paperwork. To set things up right. But that was fine. I had time now. And peace. And the will to choose. That evening, I wrote a letter. Not to Caleb. Not to Jenna. To Lily. I did not know where she was. If she would ever read it. But I wrote it anyway. Dear Lily, I miss your questions. Your giggles. The way you ran with your whole heart. I hope one day, when the world quiets, you find me again. If not, look for tulips. They bloom late. But they always return. Love, Grandma. I placed it in the back of my journal. Between lists and crumbs of grace. No need to send it. Not yet. Some seeds take longer than others. But if tended, they bloom. They always bloom. The article went live on a Sunday afternoon. I was folding laundry when Angela called. Her voice soft, almost uncertain. It's up, she said. You might want to sit down. I already was. The towel in my lap still warm from the dryer. She texted me the link. Local news. One headline. One photo. Not of them. Of me. Grainy black and white. Taken at the gas station counter. Ticket in my hand. Eyes steady. Mouth closed. The caption read, "She signed it. She won it." She never raised her voice. I stared at the screen. Not with pride. With stillness. It had taken months. Emails. Documents. Footage. And now it was done. The truth had shape. Had sound. Not shouted. Published. I turned off my phone. Walked outside. Let the wind brush against my face. Leaves moved along the sidewalk. Not in chaos. In rhythm. By evening, the messages began. Not from them. From strangers. Women older than me, younger than me. Men too. I saw your story. It felt like mine. My mother went through this. She never spoke. I never thought someone would say it out loud. I didn't answer them. But I read every word. Each message, a small pebble in the quiet pond of my chest. At the library, Angela printed out the article. Framed it without asking. Hung it in the back corner between the poetry shelves. No spotlight. No plaque. Just space. Just paper. Just proof. When I saw it, I did not cry. I ran my hand along the frame. Then stepped back. Somewhere they must have read it too. I imagined Jenna's voice tight with denial. Caleb pacing. Calling the reporter. Demanding edits. Asking for context. But there was nothing to change. The name was there. In ink. In history. Not theirs. Mine. I walked home slowly that day. Leaves crunching underfoot. A soft ache in my knees. But my back stood straight. Because for once the truth did not need my defense. It had its own legs now. And it was walking. 3 days later, Ruth knocked on my door. She held a folded flyer. Pressed tight like something that should not exist. They posted this, she said softly. On the bulletin board at the grocery store. I took it. Opened it slow. My name. In bold. Above a paragraph written in clipped careful language. She stole it. She tricked her family. She abandoned her granddaughter for money. It wasn't signed. But I knew the voice. Too polished to be anonymous. Too desperate to sound kind. Ruth waited. I did not tear it. I folded it again. Slipped it into the drawer beside the grocery lists and old coupons. I looked at her. It's all right, I said. They're trying to rewrite what was already signed. She nodded. Eyes rimmed with something between sorrow and fury. You don't deserve this. I smiled. No one deserves much. But I have what I need. That evening, Angela called again. They're deleting their posts, she said. Unfriending people. Backing away from the PTA. I said nothing. They know now, she added. Everyone does. Outside a dog barked once. Then silence returned. I reached for my journal. Opened to a blank page. And wrote one word. Peace. Not because it had come. But because I had decided to keep it. The next morning, a letter arrived. No name. No address. Just 2 sentences typed. We hope you're happy. You ruined us. I placed it in the same drawer with the grocery coupons and the old flyer. Let them live there. Beside the things that no longer had value. That day I watered the tulip bed. The soil held firm. Quiet. Unmoved. I did not check the news. Did not scroll for comments. Instead, I opened the back window. Let the wind in. It smelled like mint. Like something growing without permission. And that I thought was enough. Because sometimes justice does not arrive with doors slamming or names cleared. Sometimes, it is a woman planting seeds, with no need to be seen. I walked to the post office the next day. Carried a manila envelope under my arm. Sealed. Heavy not with weight, but with what it meant. Inside a printed copy of the lottery confirmation, my photo at the gas station, a notarized letter from Mr. Lyons, and a handwritten note. To whom it may concern, this matter is now closed. I mailed one copy to the local paper, one to the state lottery office, and one I left for myself at the library desk. Angela did not ask. She took it with both hands, placed it in a drawer beneath the checkout stamps. That night I did not dream of courtrooms or arguments, or anyone knocking at my door. I slept with the windows open. The air came in cool, clean, unbothered. And when I woke, there were birds on the fence. 3 of them. Still. Watching. I made tea. Saturday on the porch. My house was quiet. But not empty. It had breath. It had space. Mid-morning, Ruth came by with tulip bulbs. I thought you might want more, she said, smiling gently. I nodded. We planted them in silence. No instructions needed. Just rhythm. Just care. When we finished, we stood back. Hands dirty. Hearts quiet. She reached into her pocket. Pulled out a folded news clipping. I saw this yesterday, she said. Thought you should see. It was a letter to the editor. Unsigned. But different. It read. Sometimes people lie to cover what they lost. Sometimes silence is louder than truth. But sometimes, a woman holds her ground without saying a word. And we notice. I folded it slowly. Pressed it flat with my palm. Then placed it beneath my teacup. No reply needed. Later that day, I returned to the garden. Checked the rows, watered the soil. Picked one sprig of rosemary for dinner. And as I walked home, I passed a group of women on the sidewalk. One of them stopped me. You're her, aren't you? She asked. From the story. I didn't flinch. Just nodded. She didn't ask questions. Didn't push. She just smiled. Then said, "Thank you. For not disappearing." I walked the rest of the way with my back tall. Not because I was proud. But because I was free. And I had chosen to remain. Spring came without ceremony. The tulips bloomed quietly along the back fence. White, just like Ruth said. They leaned toward the morning sun as if they had always known it would come back. I sat by the window, most mornings tea in hand, watching them sway. The house no longer felt like something I had to protect. It just was. Safe. Simple. Mine. The mail came one Tuesday afternoon. A small envelope. Cream-colored. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I had not seen in years. I didn't open it right away. I set it beside the kettle. Poured water over dried mint. Watched the leaves unfurl. When the steam faded, I peeled the envelope open. It was a letter. Simple. Short. Dear Mom, I've been thinking about you. About what we did. I don't expect anything. But I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. I hope you're well. Love, Caleb. No date. No return address. Just silence between each line. I read it once. Then again. My eyes did not sting. My chest did not ache. I folded it in thirds. Placed it in the same drawer as the others. Not out of anger. Not out of forgiveness. But because some things belong in quiet places. Later that week, I returned to the library. Angela waved from behind the desk. You're early, she said, smiling. I brought something, I said. She followed me to the side room. There I opened my tote. Pulled out 3 hardcover books. Blank journals. Inside each one, the first page read, "For the woman who was told her story didn't matter. Write anyway." Angela looked at me. "For the writing club?" she asked. I nodded. I figured. Some women need a place to begin again. She didn't speak. Just placed a hand on my arm. Warm. Steady. That Friday, 3 women showed up. Older. Tired. Carrying silence like a second purse. We made tea. Passed the journals. Saturday in a circle. No introductions. No expectations. Just paper. And space. One of them, Martha, spoke first. "I haven't written anything since 1983, she said. "That's all right," I said. "Today still counts." And it did. They wrote slowly. Some with shaking hands. Some with eyes closed between each word. I didn't read over their shoulders. But I felt the air shift. Just slightly. As if the room itself had begun to exhale. Afterward, we shared scones and stories and silence. And I thought maybe this was how healing begins. Not with noise. Not with applause. But with a sentence on a page that was empty until you claimed it. One evening, as the sky turned lavender, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea and the sound of birds settling in the trees. The tulips along the fence had begun to close, tucking in their petals, like secrets ready to sleep. Ruth joined me. No words. Just a shared stillness. We watched the light fade. Watched the soft movement of wind through mint leaves and rosemary. "Did you ever write back?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Not because I'm angry. Because I'm done." She nodded. "Sometimes, the answer is in the quiet." I looked out across the yard. The garden beds. The creaky wooden chair. The side table with chipped paint. It was not perfect. But it was mine. And every corner held something that remembered me. Inside the house smelled like cinnamon. A pie cooling on the counter. I had baked it from an old recipe written in my mother's hand. The crust broke slightly along one edge. I smiled. That night I pulled out the wooden plaque. The one with words burned into it by my own hands. They toasted their luck. I cashed the truth. I hung it in the hallway beneath a black and white photo of my younger self. Taken long ago in front of a different house. A different life. I did not look bitter. I looked like someone who had survived. One morning a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. From the county library board. A handwritten note. An invitation. "Would you consider sharing your story at our spring gathering? About the garden. About resilience. About quiet justice." I placed the letter on the kitchen table. Next to the seed packets I planned to gift the writing group. I didn't know if I would say yes, but the fact they asked was enough for now. Later that week, a teenager knocked on my door, holding a clipboard. Blonde ponytail. Shy smile. "Are you Evelyn Warren?" she asked. I paused. Then said yes. "But just Evelyn is fine." She handed me a petition. Something about keeping the town garden open through summer. "They said you'd care." I took the pen. Signed my name. Carefully. Because I did care. And I was still here. That night I sat at the window with the journal on my lap. The first page still read. "For the woman who was told her story didn't matter. Write anyway." I turned the page. And began again. Not from pain. Not from need. But from choice. And from the quiet power of a woman who remembered everything but carried only what was worth keeping. The late sunlight touches the wood grain of the old table, and for a moment, everything feels soft again. I've learned that legacy isn't loud. Sometimes, it's just a name remembered in silence, and a pie shared with grace. What quiet legacy do you hope to leave behind? We'd love to read your story in the comments below. You are not alone. Your journey matters. Subscribe to Grandma Radio, where every story is a second chance.